Gauntlet thumbs. Take 2. Shop the shop, one great location to serve you better. Hi, I'm Mark Raffle. So in any event, as with the gauntlets, you make yourself a mark as a guideline, so you know where to hammer. This line is approximate, but a good guideline. It's essentially the width of the hammer from the edge of the plate. Depending on how strong your hands are and what your nerves are like, you may want to get a pair of pliers or a pair of gloves for holding on to these while you're hammering on them. Oftentimes these will curl up quite tightly. Certainly feel free to whack on them with a rawhide mallet to open them up so you can get in there and work on them. Depending on your preferences and the amount of protection that you feel that these will do, you can dish the tip of this thumb slightly. So essentially, that once you've dished it, that this line, though it is not now, will be basically flat. You want this tip wrapped down so that it is basically a single line. And a lot of that will come into shape during the planishing, and some of it will happen from grinding. At this point, we need to do essentially the same kind of hammer work that we did on the gauntlets, at least on the middle plate. By hammering, essentially planishing this sections on either side of the areas that we dished, basically the center of the plate. Notice that I'm hanging it off of this radiused area here on the anvil. essentially comes out like this. At this point we need to start the planishing. These won't require a whole lot to get them working quite smoothly. Rather methodically, what you'll do is start planishing one part of the thumb and working your way all the way to the other side. Slightly different ball for doing the absolute tip of the finger, though. Make sure that your hammer faces are absolutely polished and that there isn't any accumulated crud on them. Otherwise, even the smallest bit of grease or dirt will embed itself quite nicely in the surface that you're currently trying to make smooth. Ride pretty well on each other, as you can see. Alright, now if I can get this stake out, I'll put in a slightly different stake. Continue on and do the thumb tip. approximately this is how it ought to be. You can go over the inside of it in a similar fashion just to get any final inconsistencies. Oh, sure, nothing but convenience here. And this plate actually should be worked out over this slightly larger ball so it accommodates the thumb of the gauntlet itself a little better. What I'm now going to do is straighten up these sides. Makes the edges just a little more parallel. Also, you can essentially get rid of some of this cupping right here. If you have too much of this, it tends to dig into the thumb when you straighten them out. But you'll notice how closely these fit. A little bit more work and these two will be very close and ready to be bolted together. Same thing now has to happen on the tip plate. Try to keep the shape of the thumb pretty narrow. You don't want a thumb the size of an apple or something like that. At this point, it's time to mark the holes. Move the stake out of here. Pivot points I put in somewhat arbitrarily, but they're approximately about 3/16 from the edge, maybe a little closer. Now we go in search of our clutch. If you feel more comfortable, center punch these first. Otherwise, do it by eyeball. And with a scratch awl, you'll end up marking the hole. One of the ways you can actually start to systemize your articulation give yourself a line, maybe this depth in from the edge, maybe a little wider, paralleling the front edge of the thumb plate, or of the middle thumb plate. This gives you a guide to work with when you're fitting the tip plate to it. My preference on these is to have them not gap, and I like as much movement out of them as possible. But because of the way they've been dished, you have two choices. You can make them work only so far, keeping smooth on themselves, or taking them to the point where you want them, but they end up stepping. Notice that large gap in there, and some of that's fixable once you have them bolted together or riveted together. You can work them over the planishing stake, and I'll show you that later. So I will mark them in sort of the most extreme position that they could end up in. Check those holes for those markings for any possible mistakes. I put the hole markings, as you may or may not see, on that line that I drew. I end up using a nut and a bolt that's a little over 1/8 inch. These are convenient. If I end up using 1/8 inch holes or 1/8 inch rivets in them, the thing has a little bit of slop, and it allows you a fairly decent method of temporary attachment. You can see you get a fair range of motion out of it. Most of what you will need in a combat situation. The other half of the motion will be taken up by the back set of articulations on the plate. But as I was talking about, I'll work them over this plate over this stake a little bit, just to take them a little bit further. If you're not careful, you can really screw your nuts and bolts up. At this point, it's ready to be bolted approximately to the gauntlet. What I'm going to do now is fit this, make sure that this thumb and this thumb curvatures pretty much coincide. one of the ways you can do final fitting is to work them over each other. Oh, thank you. Got that one on film, huh? Good. Once again, you give yourself a nice pseudo-arbitrary line here. Once again, I give myself a parallel line. I find that when the two lines, the outside parallel line and the inside parallel line, run essentially straight with each other, generally a pretty good place to mark the holes. Being careful that you've got them as centered as possible, you can punch them your punch missile decides to unscrew a little bit. In many ways, this is probably enough movement, but the next step is putting in the slot. And where you put it in this center plate, depends on the size of the hand and what you wish the thumb, which direction you wish the thumb to move the most easily. If you put it on the inside, the thumb tends to move in more easily. If you have, say, a smaller hand, something like that. If you have a larger hand, you're going to be working with larger pole arms, things like that. Putting the slot on the outside is a good idea. The way you mark for it, you want the slot on the inside or the outside? Inside. Inside? Okay. Take this inside nut and bolt off and start by moving it in either direction from the existing hole, and you give yourself a series of marks that will show the line that needs to be punched to make the slot. You want to be careful about bringing your slot too close to the edge for obvious reasons. And you don't want to make it too long, otherwise it's just not going to work real effectively if you've got a 3/4 of an inch slot that goes up halfway the thumb. I'll see how quickly and efficiently I can do this slot. And the way I use the punch, there's a little nipple or dimple or whatever you want to call it on the punch itself. I line that up on the edge of the hole and take small half moons out of the metal itself, making a fairly smooth slot as long as you're careful and consistent with the way you're doing it. Probably don't want to go more than probably no more than about 3/8 is probably too long. Yeah, nothing more than about that. Now it may look comparatively smooth. Can you get any closer on that one? Good. May look comparatively smooth, but it still needs to be filed out. Otherwise, it won't run smoothly at all. There's a series of dimple or rough edges. But for demonstration's sake, bolt this back together and watch the thumb go round and round. The ABCs of making mitten gauntlet thumbs.